Been able to see that? Great. Okay, I think let's get going and people can join as we go. Afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining. If I haven't met you yet, my name is Sam Dixon. I am policy manager here at Climate Group on the EV100 campaign. I'll be chairing today's webinar on depot electrification and the technical and policy challenges that poses for fleets. Now, this is a very big topic for a lot of our members, so it's good that we're able to bring a good group together to discuss this. We've got two sets of great speakers from Arcadis and the Energy Networks Association, who I'll introduce in a second. But before that, just a couple of housekeeping points. Recording I've mentioned, but if you could also drop your name, company, and your position in the chat, just so that we know who you are, that would be great. And yeah, during the presentations, if you could keep yourselves on mute, just so there's no kind of background noise. But obviously for the Q&A, please do unmute yourself and ask any questions. So just to quickly run through the agenda, as I said, two sets of great speakers. We're going to hear from Theo and possibly Rasheen. I don't know yet. From Arcadis, who's a new EV100 member, and they're going to talk us through some of the logistical challenges for electrifying depots, and also discuss the new UK depot charging scheme and the opportunities that creates for some of our UK-based members. And then after that, we're going to hear from Janice, who's not with us yet, but he'll join around about past, and he'll talk to us about the thorny issue of connecting depots to the grid, which of course is a very big bottleneck. And he'll talk through and demo the new connections guidance tool that the ENA has put together, which will be, I'm sure, of interest to members, not just in the UK, but also across Europe and elsewhere. But before that, what I wanted to do, just to kind of set the scene very briefly, is to talk about sort of the importance of depots, and why it's important for heavy vehicle electrification. So just to provide some sort of promising statistics and data on heavy duty vehicle electrification this year, we've seen a big uptick in both the EU and the UK in the first half of the year compared to last year. So up 40% sales, up 59% sales in the UK. So that's obviously very promising, and that's in large part due to falling costs, but also strong policies. So in the UK, for example, we've had the plug-in truck grant for a while. We've also seen incentives rolled out across the EU, whether that's zero emission zones, the Eurovignette directive, which provides some exemptions on toll roads for trucks. But then most importantly, the 2040 diesel phase-out targets. So in the EU, we've got the CO2 reduction standards, which I believe have started this year and will go up to a 90% target in 2040. The UK, we think, is also due to be following suit with this very shortly. We've got corporate fleet mandates coming down the track in the EU. And then, of course, our very own EV100 targets, which where members commit to electrifying their new sales by 2040 at the latest across all vehicle categories. We're also seeing significant technology developments. So Volvo, for example, have a 600-kilometer range electric truck. So lots of reasons to be optimistic. But of course, the heaviest vehicles, in particular, we're seeing some challenges, and we haven't seen a huge amount of movement there. So what are the barriers here? Now, I think obviously upfront cost is a big issue, but we know that total cost of ownership over the lifetime can somewhat offset this if the right conditions are in place. Now, one of the problems here is that charging access and also cost remains quite a big bottleneck. So if you look at this map on this slide, truck suitable charging infrastructure is quite heavily concentrated in sort of West Europe and Northern Europe. So despite kind of the headline figure of 1,100 public chargers for trucks, but the coverage is pretty uneven. So we need a lot more growth across these high traffic corridors across the EU, and also despite policy interventions like the alternative fuels infrastructure regulation in the EU. The results of these are going to take quite a long time to be seen, partly because of the installation and grid pressures that are created by truck chargers, which need to be at least 150 kilowatts. So yeah, and then in addition to that, there are significantly high electricity costs across the EU and also the UK. And public charging in particular remains quite expensive. So, for example, in the UK, VAT costs create huge costs for vehicles trying to charge on public roads compared to private charging, where VAT is much lower. So the promise of depot electrification, and the reason I think we're here today, is that it can help significantly overcome some of these barriers. Not all of them, but a good number of them. So you don't have to wait for a large public charging network. If you've got rigid HGVs, you can just use your depot. Lower charging costs through, as I said, the kind of lower taxes and levies that are on kind of private charging, and also the opportunity to charge when electricity costs are a bit lower, for example, overnight, as well as a range of other areas that really bring down the costs of public charging, including government grants to support installation. And Arcadis are going to talk to us a bit about the UK depot charging scheme, which is a good example of that. All of which is to say that depot electrification can bring down the total cost of ownership of having electric heavy-duty vehicles, and that over the long run hopefully leads to a faster uptake of these vehicles. So yeah, I guess the two exam questions we want to answer today, or begin to answer, is how do we unlock these benefits? Are there other benefits as well? I'm sure there are. The ones I've listed are just a kind of first list, but how do we unlock them? And also, we want to hear from you, the EB100 members. What are the major opportunities and challenges that you see for electrifying your depots? So that's another sort of thing we want to get out of today. It's not just us sharing our knowledge, but also getting some contributions from you. Where do you see the challenges? Where do you see the benefits for you? So yeah, please do comment in the chat as we're going along. Any comments, questions. But for now, I'll stop sharing and I'll hand over to Theo.
Thanks, Samuel. Hopefully my slides will kick into operation, and if somebody wants to give me a thumbs up when they appear, that'd be great. So we are a dual header. I'll do most of the talking, and then Roisin will support with information around the depot charging scheme. As with, and I'll explain who we are in a second from Arcadis, but typically what we like to do when we have sessions with more than 5 people is to have a safety share. So as we are now formally into autumn, because we're in September and you're noticing that the nights are drawing in, I just thought and we're talking about depots, I just thought I'd just highlight the fact is that depots are not necessarily a safe place for pedestrians and people walking around them. And it was just highlighting the fact is that quite a lot of people don't realize that fluorescent jackets don't work at night, because fluorescence needs UV light for it to work. So the most important thing is, if you take the image on the top left there, that's a fluorescent jacket, but it has no reflective material on it. So if you take the one underneath it that has reflective bands on it, and you can see between day and night, they operate differently. And just looking at the cruise pictures to the top right there, the only thing you can see are the reflective bands there. You can't see the fact is that that same team is wearing bright orange jackets. So this was more about making sure that when people do come out on your sites, and with the winter nights coming in, etc., is that if somebody turns up and they only have a fluorescent jacket because that's what they have with them, please make sure that you do give them the right equipment to ensure that they are safe. So it's an old coin phrase: be bright, be seen, be safe. So that's our safety share for this. The agenda for our presentation is just a quick introduction to Arcadis, what we've called the 7 steps to transforming depots, something around the UK charging scheme, and something around Arcadis itself. So if you don't know who we are, Arcadis is a company with Dutch heritage. There's 36,000 of us in multiple countries around the globe. We deliver a huge array of projects. We sit, myself and Roisin sit in our mobility team. So we focus on mobility. I look after e-mobility and alternative fuels, and that's across all modes. So whether it's aeroplanes and SAF, or ships, maritime, hydrogen as well. So we haven't talked very much around hydrogen HGVs here, and that's not the topic today. But again, we're supporting clients that are looking to use hydrogen as well, and then ultimately EV in this space. But we've been around a long time, since 1888, with our history in building dams in Holland. So that's our heritage. So that's a little bit about Arcadis. And the topic for today is really around transforming depots. So it's an interesting challenge around depots, because even the word itself has multiple meanings. So in our definition of a depot, we're focusing in on where transportation meets your supply chain. There are other types of depots where they are just a storage facility for vehicles, and there are other depots that are mainly a storage facility for your goods. So we're looking at the depots which are really transportation hubs here when we talk about this, but it generally fits most of depots as they are designed. So we're looking at 7 steps and with some key action points that we can see there. But ideally, what we want to do is sort of talk you through these steps. Some of you are fully maturing your steps to your EV journey. You have done some of this already. Some of you have maybe not even started this journey. So you may have undertaken some of these steps for smaller vehicles, maybe cars and vans and light goods vehicles, but not necessarily your heavier fleet that's out there. So the question that we kind of ask when we start with strategic planning is what is your plan, and how has this been developed? Really, we want to ensure that when we work with clients, that they have a real clear understanding of their journey. What do they need to get to, and what is driving that journey? Because I think Sam mentioned a number of policies that are happening. There's a policy decision, but a lot of companies are doing this because they know it's the right thing to do. So it's making sure that we have that clear strategic intent, because ultimately at some point you start coming to talk about money to organizations and the cost to transition a fleet, etc. And you've got to maintain that golden thread back up to why you're doing this. It's always important to maintain the reason why you're changing. So we always start off to work with clients to actually set out their clear strategic direction, and then what their requirements are. So most of those requirements are based on understanding their fleet and operations. So we say to people, well, you're developing a plan. It's got to meet your ultimate business needs, which is your fleet assessment, your movement of your goods and your logistics that you're delivering. So we'll carry out analysis. We'll work with clients to develop that. And one of the things that we found with smaller fleets rather than HGV fleets is the complete differences in how organizations capture and manage data. So some companies have got high quality telematics data that is has been embedded in vehicles for a long period of time. There's a long and huge amount of data around their utilization, and some organizations actually have very little data. So one of the key important things when you're on this journey is to maintain that data and knowledge base, because it is something that, you know, ultimately, if you've got poor data going into your first stage of planning, you're going to end up with poor results coming out of the other end. And then looking at that starts to identify your quick wins, your vehicles that are doing that. We talked about some of your HGVs or some of the larger vehicles will do fixed point-to-point deliveries. So they have quite a fixed route. So if you run a fleet that is not multi-drop or is a fixed route multi-drop type operation, it's easy to start to identify vehicles that can be electrified first. But one of the things we say to people is don't focus on the vehicle, focus on the service you're providing, because actually what you might be able to do is to bring in an electric vehicle to replace a vehicle and move that vehicle, depending on its age, to somewhere else. And then ultimately, it's got to wash its face. It's got to create the right business case for you to return and a return on the investment. So we help to develop TCO models, total cost of ownership models, and look at the investments and opportunities that come with that. This is where most people get stuck, though, because this is all about infrastructure. Most businesses have never had to really worry about creating their own filling stations. So typically you either use bunkered fuel, which will come in. There'll be a big container full of diesel in a depot. It's usually tucked around the back that no one really sees, and it's part of an operation. Or you use the public filling stations for certain fill-ups of your vehicles. The difference with depot charging now is you're now bringing in the refueling into your depot infrastructure, and some of your depots won't be brand new and they've been there for many years, and you haven't had to think about retrofitting what is a significant amount of infrastructure. So the first thing is to think about the change itself. What are you doing today, and what can be changed and what can't be changed? So in terms of order, what we've done, if we think about what we did in the first phase, we looked at what your demand looks like. So what does your demand look like? And really what this is a reaction to that demand to look at the supply that you need. So ultimately you need a supply of power, which is the fuel, the type of charger that you require. And in most instances, for heavier goods vehicles, you are looking at higher power chargers. But that doesn't mean you only need higher power chargers in your depots, because you will have different vehicles that attend that depot. You have vehicles that may actually dwell for longer than you actually think. Just as an example, we did a piece of work for an ambulance service trust, and they said we need all these super rapid chargers. And when we actually did the analysis of their fleet, they were dwelling at night for over 9 hours. And 9 hours on a typical charge means that you don't need super high power chargers for their vehicles. So you need to look at the charger selections. And then what's more difficult is your depot layout. So typically you've run that operation for multiple years in the same physical footprint. You've worked out all your turning circles, your operational demands in that space, and you're going to have to change that if you're going to bring infrastructure in. Now, if you're fortunate and you have more physical footprint than you need, that can make it easier. But typically, what we have found with a number of clients is that you almost have to remaster plan your site. So you have to look at your site, and it is an opportunity to say, well, actually, if our depot has grown over time organically, and there are multiple functions on that, is this an opportunity to start to look at this in a more holistic way and to look at this from a master planning point of view? So uh, we have developed new site master plans for depots where they've started out with the challenge of bringing in a new fleet that needs electrification. But what they've actually found is in some depots, they also maintain their own vehicles as well. So not only do you need to upgrade the facilities for the vehicles to pick up and drop off, but you also have to think about how many ramps do you need? What type of ramps do you need to inspect the vehicles? There are now new braking test requirements for vehicles, and you have to do all of this within your operator's license. In the UK, you have an O license that ensures that you can satisfy your vehicle parking in the space that you have. So depot layouts and the amount of civil works is significant in some instances. If you've had to lay power cables before, it may be that you're connecting into a supply that is a huge distance away from you, and that can create a huge cost burden to you. So understanding your power supply, talk to your providers early, and we'll come on to that. And I think the presentation after us will pick up a lot about the power side. And then look at technology. So how will you integrate your new fleet into your infrastructure and software that you already have? You've got energy management software, because ultimately some of your sites are already consuming a huge amount of energy. If you are using cold store, you're already consuming a huge amount of energy. Is there a way of managing that? Is there a way of bringing in or utilizing renewables to capture and store power that you can use to reduce your costs or create a shaving on your load during your operation? And then how do you incorporate new information into your telematics and fleet management systems? Most providers now have EV specific metrics where they can take data from the vehicles, such as your battery, your state of charge, and then start to use that to create more optimized charging opportunities for you. Regulation and safety compliance. You're changing something that you haven't had to think about before, but again, thinking about your permitting that you have to do. Are you needing planning consent? Are you needing environmental permits? One of the projects that we're currently working on has looked at ensuring that there is capture of, or there is sufficient traps that if there was an EV fire, that any fire event would trap any materials that came from that. Fire will come up multiple times when you're designing a site, but around insurance risk, tell your insurer that you are moving to an EV fleet. They may have very specific requirements, especially around fire risk. The last thing you want is to have brought in an EV fleet, haven't told your insurer. So bring them along with you on this journey. And ultimately, you've got new kit that's in your depot. Make sure that you've trained people so they know what they're dealing with in your depot. Ultimately, you need to work with the right people. So how do you source the vehicles to fit your needs? How do you source the people to help design, build, and transform your depots, as well as bringing in suppliers of the right hardware, software, and somebody who's going to install and maintain this? This isn't a very quick fix. This is a long-term relationship that you need to have with a vendor around equipment, and ultimately have the right service agreements. Some people get really nervous and they go for something really excessive to start off with. We want 24-hour a day, 7-day a week. We want somebody almost sitting at the end of the phone to come out to our depot to fix something. But 9 times out of 10, they can fix it remotely with software. So think about the service contracts that you put out there, because you may be paying over the nose for something you don't need. And then ultimately think about your change management and communication. You've got a huge amount of stakeholders there, including your your staff. You may have a heavily unionized environment. You're changing what somebody might need to do. So a lot of drivers will turn around and say, well, I'm not paid to plug in to this piece of kit. I just drive the vehicle. Some drivers don't even refuel their vehicles. They turn up, they drive, they drop their vehicle off again. So just thinking about how you communicate change, and then think about your phased rollouts. Big bangs don't usually work. They usually end up with you having big problems all at once. So think about how you phase your transition plan, because you need to be sensible around this. Some of your assets and trucks, for example, will have a life of possibly 7 to 10 years, if not 15 years, life in them. So actually transitioning these in the right order is really important. But make sure that your transition plan has the balance between the infrastructure and the fleet change happening at sort of same time. So you don't have infrastructure sitting there doing nothing, and you don't have vehicles that can't plug in. And then finally, make sure on the 7 steps that you're future-proofing what you're thinking. Have you thought far enough ahead? Is your scheme expandable? Can you upgrade the kit that you're putting in? So are you putting in kit that can be modularized? And then make sure that your upgrades and as technology evolves, you haven't boxed yourself into one form of communication. But always remember to celebrate success. Your first truck arriving, when you've transitioned a big part of your fleet, just remember, this is about telling people that you're doing the right thing as well as doing the right thing itself. So just to summarize, the key actions and steps in this is to conduct that fleet and energy assessment, engage with your utility and local authorities early if you need any planning consent, get that phase plan in there, select, procure your vehicles and your infrastructure, and make sure they actually work together. And then your power and depot changes, train and inform people, and then make sure you're optimizing what you have. So that's me, and I will pass on quickly to Roisin.
Thanks, Theo. Hi, everyone. So I'm just going to do a quick couple of minutes for those who might have depots based in the UK. And as Theo was saying at the beginning, depot being a very broad word, it can encompass lots of different definitions. So this is just to make you aware, if you're not already, of the recently announced government depot charging scheme. It's unlike a fund we've seen from government before, so it's quite unique in that it's open to both public and private sector fleets. Previously, we've only really seen grants like these open to public sector, who typically struggle in some of these areas, particularly for fleet transition. So it's open to both public and private sector fleets. It's got a real big list of requirements, but most of these are fairly feasible, and you will match most of these. I've listed them there, just going through each one. So being a fleet operator for at least a year at time of application, you must own or have consent from a landlord to install charge points. You must have a battery electric van, HGV or coach as part of your vehicle fleet at the time of submission of the funding application as well. And then the more difficult aspects of this are you must be able to complete the installation of charge points at a depot site by 31st of March next year. And I've put it in bold because it will be the biggest challenge for anyone who's going for this fund. You must have sufficient grid capacity at that site to support the charging by that time as well. So as part of the submission, which we'll go into in a second, but you will need to evidence engagement with a DNO already before you put an application in, and how you will be able to showcase that you will have the sufficient grid capacity by that point. So that's going to be the real pivotal part of this. I'm sure you've talked about it before, and I know you were talking about at the beginning of this call that the grid connection is the greatest challenge in all of this, and often the slowest part of all of it, unfortunately, as well, just due to the processes involved in getting that set up. So the scheme itself, some details, as I say, really unique. We've not seen one like this before. It can cover up to 75% of charge point and civil costs, so capital costs, up to a maximum of £1 million across all sites. So there's no limit to the number of sites you can apply for. You can apply for as many as you like, as long as they can evidence all the requirements. But you're only allowed to submit one application per organisation. As I say, it's open to both public and private sector. There is a closing date of the 28th of November or when the fund has been exhausted. So my expectation is that it will close sooner, because as I say, this is a really broad scheme open to so many people. And obviously with the value being a maximum of £1 million, it could go fairly quickly. There's not many applications that could get in there to cover all of those costs. So this is a call to action for anyone who thinks they might be in a position to meet all of those requirements. You can submit. There's a two-stage criteria. If we go into the next slide, thanks, Theo. You can fill out the form as an application form. It's split into 2 phases. So phase 1, filling out all of those details. So your existing infrastructure, your vehicles, the D&O correspondence. So D&O being the distribution network office, or similar if you're in Europe. So basically your electricity connection provider. And then your projected EV demand. So if you have a strategy or a fleet transition plan already, just evidencing what's in that plan, how you expect to finance the rest of the project, and meeting the requirements as was set out on the previous slide. And then a part of that is the financing. So indicative costing plans to fund the rest of the project, which I already mentioned, and then proof that 31st of March deadline can be met. So once you submit that, eligible candidates, if you pass that phase 1, will be invited to submit a phase 2. Though if you are invited for that, it doesn't guarantee you access to the funding. You'll just be invited to do that more detailed stage of the application, and then a decision will be made. If you get through to phase 2, there's a bit more details to go through, but hopefully if you're at the point of meeting all those requirements, this should be quite readily available information to pull together. So it's fairly low intensity in terms of resourcing if you have it all together. If not, we are happy to help, and we are helping clients in the UK for this at the moment, pull what they need together in order to access this fund. So we're very happy to chat to people or discuss your requirements, and if you think you might be in a position to put forward an application for this fund.
Thank you. And that was how one of the things that we can help you with. What I'll do is I'll just talk you through, but invariably these are kind of examples that we help clients with in the e-mobility space. I'm not going to go through all of those, but we do everything from that feasibility that we talked right at the beginning to support all the way through the design and REBA stages to help installation as well. And we help on procurement. So these are examples that we currently do, and for our EV100 members, what we've what we're offering is a free one-to-one chat with you for an hour, sort of virtual workshop, just to talk through and discuss and offer advice on what you're doing and where you've had some of these challenges. We're going to share the slides, so you've got our email addresses, that both myself and Roisin on there. It's something that we will offer to EV100 members if they want to have a chat. Just, invariably some of it is just reassurance. So if that's all we want is just reassurance, then reach out to us and we can have a virtual sort of workshop with your organization to do that. And if you're starting on the journey, again, similarly, we can point you in the right direction. So that's the end of our presentations. Is happy to take questions from people if they have any.
Yeah, we've got time maybe for 1, maybe 2 questions. So if anyone wants to jump in, please do. Otherwise, I've got some of my own, but I'll let the audience go first. No? Well, if not, I might take chair's privilege and ask. I mean, you mentioned that there's these seven steps. Which one of those, or which combination would you say the most challenging? I know grid connection, you said, is the kind of the thing that takes the longest, but in your experience with various clients, which ones do you think?
So our experience is that if you break this down into two experiences, one is about operational change. So typically a business has been running an operation quite slickly and optimized it down to and honed it down over multiple years to operate in a particular way. Fleet managers know their fleets inside out. They know what they're doing. You know, I could ask any fleet manager, you know, how much diesel do you buy a month? And they can almost tell me, not to the litre, but they understand that operation. They understand how their depots function. And it's change that is usually one of the biggest challenges for us. So actually organizational and operational change, and how does a business transform itself to start to introduce sustainability into their operation, such as transforming their fleets. So, you know, business transformation is the first. And the second one is infrastructure change. So the second one around, you know, putting in chargers, so you lose some physical space, so that then impacts on your operation. The disruption of construction, it is disruptive. So you may lose parts of your depot whilst you're doing works. Then you have to put in the charging infrastructure, and then all the and yes, if it's there, somebody will drive into it. So you have to put the protection around your equipment as well, because this isn't cheap kit. And then you've got to get the power and grid connections. So those are the two bits. It's business transformation itself and the actual install of the kit.
So big undertaking, but great that we have businesses like Arcadis to help on the journey. Okay, are there any more questions for Theo or Roisin on their presentation? Otherwise, I'll hand over to Giannis, who's going to talk about grid connections in a bit more detail for us. Giannis, do you want to share your screen, or shall I?
Yeah, I can share my screen. Yeah, sure. Can you see my screen? Yeah, okay. So afternoon, everyone, and thank you very much for the invitation. As a quick way of introduction, my name is Yannis Katsaros, and I'm a low carbon technologies project manager at ENA. So today I would like to speak to you about the transport connections guidance. So I recently launched a tool by ENA. Let me provide you some background of this work, and then I will continue with the demo of this tool. So in the past few years, there were several workshops held across the industry, led by DESNES, OSEF, or ENA. All of them acknowledging the need for developing a common connections guidance for all fleet operators or businesses looking for grid connections. Obviously, connections guidance exist, developed either by DNOs, Energy UK, Gov UK, but they all come with limitations. In addition to that, having several versions of guidance telling essentially the same truth may create a lack of inconsistency across industry. So therefore, DNOs and trade associations within the framework of the Fleet and Depots Decarbonization Forum, which is managed by ENA, thought to develop a common connections guidance that will be short, simple, user-friendly, and easily accessible. The purpose of the guidance wouldn't be to duplicate information rather than enhancing the existing guidance documents that are available in the public domain. And more importantly, the guidance should support all customers regardless the stage of the decarbonization journey. So in order to do that, we started with around 20 workshops with stakeholders with a diverse range of stakeholders within the transport sector, as you can see, from emergency services, retail, airports to agriculture. The purpose of those workshops were to run exploratory conversations with those stakeholders and understand the objectives of the decarbonization journeys, their challenges, their relationship with the DNOs, and also the experience they had with the connection processes. So these workshops, the outcome of those workshops was to develop a prototype of the guidance. So in the stage 2 of that project, we ran again around 20 workshops with inviting old stakeholders, but also new ones, including the Department of Transport and Ofgem, to perform prototype testing of the connections guidance tool, and at a later stage to do a user acceptance testing. The feedback during the workshops was overwhelmingly positive, but of course, as it happens with any new developed tool, there was a lot of constructive feedback, and I'm quite confident today to say that we have incorporated the majority of this feedback, although this may have some impact on the initial timeline we had in mind for the launch. And I'm sure more feedback will come as we disseminate this tool that was launched 2 months ago. So I'm going to stop now with the background and crack on with the demo of the tool, which is going to be more interesting. Can you see my screen? Yep. All right. Yeah. Okay. Perfect. Yeah. So this is the welcome page of the tool. So essentially, this tool is a free interactive tool hosted at TNA's website with the objective of offering strong pre-application support to customers looking to introduce or expand the number of electric transport assets they have. You may not be familiar with the terminology, with the term electric transport assets. However, we needed to come up with a term that will encompass all the different asset types, from vehicles, vans, heavy goods vehicles to vessels, and tractors, because this guidance is designed in order to help all stakeholders within the transport sector and not only fleet operators. So essentially, this tool has the objective to guide the stakeholder or the user through all the necessary steps before submitting a connection application, signposting to additional information and tools like DNO tools that you will see a bit later in the presentation. And finally, based on the input of the user, to advise on the next step. So essentially, we are speaking here about a tailored journey. On the other hand, this tool is not a calculator, so it's not going to calculate the demand of the demand or the peak demand of a customer. Also, it helps preparing a customer for submitting an application, but it won't replace the actual application form. And lastly, it's not a prioritization tool. So essentially, it won't, if a company has multiple depots to decarbonize across the country, it won't help you to decide which one to decarbonize. So this tool is built for one site only at this stage. So moving on with step 1. So in step 1, we have 5 different tiles here. So if I click on the top left one, how does electricity network work? So we have included here a nice infographic encompassing all the main components of the UK's electricity system. For someone that is completely new to this industry. So we have generators, transmission, distribution, suppliers, customers, the national energy system operator, who balances demand and supply, and Ofgem, which is the regulator. So if a user wants to find more about these components, they can just click on the button here, and a pop-out window will appear. Closing this one. Now we have also included a useful glossary, so which includes useful terminology for someone that is not familiar, for example, with technical terms. What is a kilowatt? What is a connection? What is a connection surgery? Or even what is a DNO? So the user can just click on this one and can get the glossary in a PDF format. I would also like to highlight two important features here. The first one is that the user has the ability to return at a later date. So assuming a user has made 50% progress within the tool, but then they need to go back to their company and discuss internally in order to find the parameter that is requested by the tool. They can do that and come back at a later date by using the unique reference number with all the progress saved. In addition to that, in the end of the tool, in the last page, the user will be able to download a report which will include all their inputs. So this report can be downloaded and can be used, for example, internally, or even share it with the DNOs prior to the connection surgery, so prior to a discussion with the DNO. Moving on. Then the first question here in step 1 is, have you visited the tool before? I will click no. So as I mentioned before, the tool provides you with a unique reference number. To clarify here, the tool doesn't email you the reference number, so you have to copy it and save it at a safe place by yourself. So assuming I have done this for the purpose of this demo. Then moving on with step 2. So here we have some questions asked to the user in order to help build the profile of their organization. So the first question is, what is the stakeholder type that closely matches your organization? So here we have included 3 columns, as you can see. On the left column, we have the sectors. On the middle one, we have more or less the fleet operators, and on the right one we have blue light services, local authorities, charge point operators, etc. Obviously, this list couldn't be exhaustive. Therefore, we have included a box here in case a user doesn't identify themselves with any of those categories, then he has the ability he's able to provide the stakeholder type that matches his organization. So for this demo, I will choose vehicle rental. Click next. Then again, the second question is, please tell us the size of the organization. I will choose between 11 and 50 employees. As you can see here, there's a nice infographic in the bottom of the page. So whenever you provide an input, then this infographic builds up. So the next question is, where do you need power? So obviously this tool is designed for stakeholders looking to decarbonize their site, workplace, or depots. But if there are stakeholders that they need power primarily at home or primarily en route, we have included some information. So again, you click on the tile and there is a pop-out window that expands with necessary information. However, as I mentioned, the objective of this tool is to provide guidance on the stakeholders decarbonizing their sites, workplace, or depot. So I will choose this one. Now, the second question here is, do you need power for a single site or a multiple site? As I mentioned in the beginning, this tool is developed for a single site only. However, why we included the multiple sites? Because if you click multiple sites, you have the option either to select the regions of your depots on the map, or if your depots are in the boundaries, are in DNO boundaries, maybe providing the postcode will give you a more accurate result. So I will put 2 postcodes here. I will click next. And what we see here are the relevant DNOs to the location of the depot. So essentially, you can understand which one is your DNO based on the location of your depot. We have some information, some high-level information per DNO here, as you can see. Important to highlight, we have a link about their how to find their network availability, so essentially their heat maps. And because we have received some feedback from stakeholders that is difficult to navigate through the DNO heat maps, we have also included a guidance here developed by Energy Systems Catapult, which clearly explains how to navigate through the heat maps of each DNO. So I'm going back now. I will choose a single site. Yeah. I will put this address, which is in London, and obviously, since it's in London, the respective DNO is UK Power Networks. I will click next. Then the other question here is, do you need power for a new or an existing site? And as you can see here, we have included some text urging the user to make a selection here because it's a crucial parameter. The journey will be different if someone is planning a new site or the new site is under construction compared to someone that has an existing site where they want to install electric assets. So for this demo, I will click existing site. The next question is, do you own or rent your site? So why we are having these questions here? Because if you are the tenant or a prospective owner or tenant, you need a letter of consent from the landlord of the property in order to make any installation or digging or underground work. So we have included this high-level information. Obviously, the process of getting permission from the landlord may be complicated, but this is not the intention of the tool is not to solve that one. But on the other hand, is to provide this high-level information that we need to flag to the customer that you need to consider also that one, also this piece of information if you're not the owner of the site. Moving on to step 3. So this step is all about building the electricity demand profile of the customer. So again, here we have included some text mentioning to the user that although you can progress with the tool without inputting any figures, it is strongly recommended to include those figures in order to have a tailored next step in the end of the tool. Why we're doing that? Because we didn't want the user, if for example they don't have a figure of the agreed supply capacity, to get discouraged and leave. So we are telling to the user, you can continue throughout the tool and see how it works. However, if you want a tailored output in the end, then you need to provide us with those figures. And starting with the first figure, which is the agreed supply capacity. So agreed supply capacity is the amount of electricity that DNO commits to providing to a customer to their site at any given time. So the question here, do you know your agreed supply capacity, yes or no? I will click no. So we provide here some guidance on how to find your agreed supply capacity. So usually the agreed supply capacity is in the electricity bill. And for that reason, we have included a picture of electricity invoice of a fleet company, highlighting where they can find the agreed supply capacity. However, if for any reason they can't find the agreed supply capacity, which happens, then they can click help, the help button, and then we provide them with UKPN's email specifically related to this kind of request. So essentially they can email UK Power Network and find their agreed supply capacity. Having found the agreed supply capacity, I will click yes, and I will put 500 as an indicative figure. It is measured in kVA. I will click next. Then the next question is, do you know your peak demand for electricity? Now, what we mean here with electricity that is needed to run the daily operation. So, for example, lighting, heating, cooling of buildings, along with equipment and machinery. And specifically, we're interested in the peak demand of this electricity. Again, the question is, do you know it, yes or no? Assuming they don't know it, we provide some information to the users. We tell them to look either in their electricity bills, or if they have a smart meter installed in their business premises, they can also look at this data and find the required information. Assuming they found this information, they can include it here. Sometimes the unit for the electricity is in kVA and sometimes in kilowatts. So what we've done here, if I put 300, for example, we have a calculator that provides the corresponding amount in kilowatt. But since in the previous step I put agreed supply capacity in kVA, I will keep it kVA on this step as well. Now, this page is all about the electrification of transport assets. So we don't aim here to make a calculation for the user, rather than make the customer think what are the right questions they should ask themselves in order to understand their decarbonization needs. So, for example, we have included questions here. Are your transport assets in continual use? Where are your assets where are your assets when they are not in use, how many miles do they cover, are there any periods of downtime, and how long is this period of downtime, with the ultimate goal of these questions to understand how much power they will need, when they will need the power, and how these power needs align with their current peaks throughout the day. We have included also some guidance here or explain the different types of charge points. The one comes from NGET and the other one from the Institution of Engineering and Technology. And also have a tile here asking a question, when do you plan to electrify your transport assets? So this is a quite important information for the DNO because it helps them with their future planning. So the user we can select here from phased approach, full implementation, or simply I don't know. To add here that DNOs offer ramped connections. So what is exactly a ramped connection? So assuming a customer needs 5 megawatt, the DNOs is able to provide 1 megawatt per year over the next 5 years. So this is more like a phased approach offered by the DNOs. If, for example, there are network constraints that doesn't allow the DNO to provide the 5 megawatt from year 1. Close this tile. Moving. Now, here we need to think about the overall power requirements. So what we mean with overall power requirements, we need to understand the electricity demand, the peak electricity demand needed to run the daily operations, plus the peak demand needed to electrify the transport assets like the vehicles. And the question here is, do you know your forecasted peak demand for electricity? Yes, no, I have a rough idea. If we click no, then we provide here some advice. So, for example, you need to speak with your colleagues to share ideas and plans. You can seek external consultancy to understand your power requirements. Obviously, as ZNA, we can't really recommend a specific consultancy, but it's more like a generic guidance. Or use digital tools and software to convert your operations to power requirements for electrification. A number of key questions here that someone could ask their colleagues, and what key internet search terms could they use to find these consultancy services. So I will click yes for this demo that I know my forecasted peak demand, and I will put a number of 700. So now the last question is your forecasted peak demand higher or lower than your agreed supply capacity? In that particular example, our agreed supply capacity was 500. Now the total forecasted peak demand, including the electrification of transport assets, is 700. So that's why we'll click higher. Following stakeholders' feedback, we have tried to include some cost information around connections. Obviously, each DNO has different time scales and different cost connections. However, we try to split it into upfront and ongoing costs to provide to the customer a better idea of what cost they should expect around connection. So the upfront costs are around application fees, design of the connection, materials like cabling, digging works, installation works, etc. While the ongoing cost is the ones that are under the name distribution use of system charges. So essentially, the DNOs charge the customer a cost for operating and investing in their network. And why we included this type of information? Because this information is useful for prospective developers to understand the potential impact of this type of cost on projects in their portfolio. And as you can see here, I have included a link specifically to UKPN, which will, if I click it, I will go to the dashboard. I can choose the license area, the domestic type, and then I will get the different bands and the different distribution use of system charges. The same applies to the other DNOs, but for my example, for this example, my DNO is UKPN only. We have included also some budget estimate tools. So every DNO provides these budget estimate tools. This is a quite handful tool because it provides an indicative cost of a connection. Obviously, it's a desktop study and it shouldn't be perceived as a firm offer, but at least if modeled accurately, it can provide an indicative cost to the customer. And as you can see here again, the link to the budget estimate tool is provided within this tile. Following stakeholder feedback, we have included case studies. At the moment, we have only 3, but I'm expecting a lot of case studies from a diverse range of stakeholders. And by all means, if you are interested to provide me with a case study, please do so. Just to show you what I mean with a case study. So I click here. So this example is a small connection. So essentially, we have information around the costs, the build time, and an example came route of a fleet depot decarbonization, and as you can see here, the chargers as well. So our aim is to enrich this particular section with as many case studies as possible, because a lot of users can identify themselves if they are looking at existing case studies. Moving on. So step 4. So these are all the options that can reduce the peak demand in order to avoid a costly upgrade. So I'm not going into much detail of all of those options in the interest. Thank you, Theo. Yeah, I'm not going into detail on those all of those tiles. Again, you can click and read through all the content. On a high level, we have optimizing your existing connection by load shifting. Load management essentially allows you to control and manage the load if you use multiple EV chargers at the same time. For example, smart charging when you use electricity when the demand is lower or when there is a high penetration of renewable energy. Time profile connection is when you agree with your DNO to use electricity only at a certain periods of a day. And to the best of my knowledge, this strategy is used with bus operators at this point of time. The ramped connection, the one that I mentioned before. So essentially, you have a 5 megawatt of demand, providing 1 megawatt per year over a 5 years period. Solar panels and battery storage and public charging, which, although this is like a costly option at this stage. So I'm clicking next. And we have reached the final step. So here you can see a summary of the stakeholders' input. So essentially, the type of stakeholder, the size, it is a single site, the existing single site, the agreed supply capacity figure, the peak demand, and also your forecasting peak demand, which is higher than the agreed supply capacity. If I click next, I get the tailored next step. So based on our inputs, our forecasted peak demand, including the electrification of the assets, is higher than the agreed supply capacity. Therefore, we need to complete an application to upgrade our connection in the existing site. Then there is some information how do I apply. So we have included the link here, and also a link if you have any questions around the application process. You can ask directly UKPN. Finally, this is the report that I mentioned in the very beginning. So if I click here, again, you get a summary of your inputs. So the stakeholder profile, the figures on the technical parameters, who is your DNO, and essentially and more importantly, what is your next step. So you can download this report, use it internally, or share it with your DNO in case you have arranged a connection surgery with them. We have also a feedback scale here, so I would appreciate if in your spare time have a go with the tool and let us know what you think. It is quite new tool, so it's quite important to understand at this stage for any further developments and how useful you find it. I think that was all from me.
Thank you very much, Yanis. Very interesting and looks like a very useful tool, which hopefully some of our members in the UK will be able to use at some point. It's definitely something which in the EU, I know a lot of our members have been calling out for this kind of transparency. So very useful to see that in practice. Does anyone have any questions? We've got about 5 to 6 minutes left. Theo.
Yeah, thanks, Ian. It's really interesting. And my question was around I think I'm not sure which tile it was, tile 4 or something like, around how you can reduce the impact of needing a bigger connection. Is the tool going to minus the benefits of that? So say, for example, if we said on-site generation and storage, say, for example, if I was going to put in a megawatt battery on site, does it automatically remove that, or
No.
so it doesn't do the calculations?
No, it doesn't do any calculations. You can consider it as an educational piece of work.
Okay.
It doesn't do any calculations rather than providing information of the important elements that the customer needs to consider, especially the one that is in the early stages of the decarbonization journey.
Anyone else? Graham.
I just wanted to say I appreciate both the presentations, really informative. We are a DNO. We appreciate the grid capacities, especially in the UK. We operate in Scotland, obviously UK, Ireland, and obviously down in the south. There is so many grid constraints that as a DNO, we have 700 EV chargers across our network. But one of the problems that we've had is the grid constraint itself, and being a DNO, we don't jump to the front of the queue. But what I would say, and Arcadis must know this as well, is that we've applied for that government grant for the charging installations on site, but we've also used the battery storage systems as well as a way of getting around the grid constraints. And I think that is really pertinent. That I appreciate this. This is a great thing from Energy Networks that I didn't know was in place, to be honest with you. So I appreciate being given a heads up on that. But I think at the end of the day, we do have a Volvo EHGV, and we've got grid constraints ourselves when using it. We can only use 43 kilowatts, so yeah, it's difficult for everybody in the UK because we just don't have the wider open network that we should have. Hopefully that will change and change very soon. I just wanted to say this tool can be used straight away, can it? Yeah, great. Okay.
Yeah, it's a free interactive tool hosted at ENA's website. I can provide you the link in the chat here, actually, if you want.
Yeah, no, perfect. I really appreciate that. And yeah, I'll reach out to you, Theo, or Rasheen as well, and just have a chat with you as well in the future. Thanks for that.
Graham. And thanks for the link, Janice. Anyone else have a question? A couple more minutes. No, if not, I might take the last one and ask: do you have a sense of sort of how unique this tool is, kind of in a international context? Have you seen any other countries or regions sort of looking to set something up like this? And if not, do you have any sort of advice for how to engage with sort of energy networks to sort of get something like this up and running? Because I mean, I can see that it's actually in a lot of stakeholders' interests to have this. It's not just for the fleets; it's the networks as well will benefit from having this kind of foresight.
Yeah, in all honesty, I haven't made any research internationally if any similar tool exists or not. However, I would say that this tool has been designed around the GB context, that's for sure. So things like DNO processes, Ofgem regulation, ENA standards are very UK specific. But in my opinion, the underlying framework is highly transferable. So essentially, the way the tool guides users through the different journeys, how it highlights the technical considerations like the agreed supply capacity checks, or the use of the case studies to bring it to life, could apply in Europe as well. That would be my initial thought. Yeah.
Great.
But yeah, I appreciate someone else may have a different opinion, but that would be my initial thought. Yeah.
No, thank you. That's helpful. Great. Well, I think we can start to wrap up there. If we want to thank Janice and Theo and Roisin for their presentations. That was really insightful, and I'm sure there's lots of follow-ups to be had. I'll make sure to share the slides and also the recording round with you guys, but also the rest of the EV100 network, so that people who weren't here are able to have a look. And yeah, I'll share your contact details as well, Janice and Theo and Roisin. So yeah, thank you very much everyone for joining, and yeah, hopefully see you soon.
Thank you for having us. Bye.
Bye. Thanks all.